So we are reading Aghora, the left hand of God. We are on chapter 8, page number 211 of the book and 108 of the PDF.
Chapter 8 Avishkar. One of my friends once asked me, is there ever one moment of the day when you are not doing Avishkar? What could I tell him? Does he know the wonderful joy of Avishkar? He can't imagine it because he really does not know how to love. Avishkar. When I say that spirits can be helpful, I'm sure you cannot imagine all the ramifications of such a statement. Let me explain it in this way. Why do we Hindus worship stone or metal or wooden images of our deities? We are not worshipping the image. We are requesting the deity to come in his or her ethereal form and take possession of the image, where we then concentrate our worship. We treat the image as a living being because a ritual called Pran Pratishtha is performed in which prana, the life force, is actually transmitted into the image.
So, so the idea here is that the image represents the energy, it represents the spirit, and the spirit occupies the image. Okay. Even in shamanism, you can take an edifice and actually, inculcate life into it. So this is how voodoo also works, right? You make a doll of a person to represent a person, and you bring the life force of that person into the voodoo doll, and then you do things to the doll and it will affect that person. They but to make that voodoo doll, you need to have something of that particular person. So maybe a hair or some clothes that that person has worn or something. So some essence needed to be there. But over here, the image of the Devi or Devta represents the spirit of that particular vibration or that particular vibration. Our Rishi Munis actually created the forms to represent the spirits.
You don't just take any image and try to add prana to it. The first thing you must do when you want to perform a pran pratishtha is bhoot shuddhi. That is, you must clear out all the filthy, troublesome spirits. I don't say evil spirits because no spirit is really evil. But some are so miserable, they will try
So again, no spirit is bad.
to.
Okay. The point is that they are troubled. If you give them what they want, 9 out of 10 times, there's no problem.
They are so miserable they will try to harm you without any reason, just as a mad dog bites whoever crosses its path. After Bhut Shuddhi is done, then Bhu Shuddhi, purification of the ground where the image is to be located, is indicated. Only when everything is purified should the Pran Pratishtha be performed. However, it will take years and years for a stone image to respond to you, because even after prana is added, the deity must be called repeatedly, and only if the worship is continuous for some time will he or she become fixed there. True, if an image has been worshipped before by a Siddha or a Mahapurush or some other high ranking immortal being, you will get all the benefit of that previous worship. But where will you locate such an image?
So again, many times when we go for Vastu visits, people say we want to make a temple in our factory premises, right? Now, if you're making a temple, then the worship has to be performed properly in the temple. Otherwise, it creates different sorts of problems. Okay. Now, over here, what he's saying is that the more a murti is worshipped, the more energy it starts to get inculcated in the murti. And especially if the murti has been worshipped and has been associated with a siddha or a mahapurush or a person who is highly evolved, the energy field of that particular murti takes a different proportion altogether.
To avoid this problem, you can worship mentally with your subtle body. By long worship, your subtle body will actually take the form of the deity you are worshipping, and you can achieve. This is much better because there are no external images to be broken or defiled. There is only your inner self, which is impervious to all the exterior pollution.
So, Mansik Puja, we've discussed this before. Mansik Puja is always a better method. It's a more highly evolved method of actually doing the ritual. So, you don't have a murti, but you do the puja mentally. In your mind, you do the entire puja.
So, you can worship an image which has been made to live, or you can use your subtle body which is already living. And there is a third way also, which I am sure you have never even imagined. The deity can enter into somebody's body, and you can worship him or her in that way. Your sadhana is very easily accomplished. The deity is pleased, and the person into whose body the deity enters plays with his beloved and is purified in the bargain. Beside deities, you can call the spirit of some saint or fakir who can do many mundane works for you. Isn't this useful? We call this Avishkar in Sanskrit and Baitak or Hazri in Hindi or Urdu.
So, again, an entity can enter another's body also. This is something that we see many times where in weddings, etc., the ancestor enters the body and then starts to speak. There are many people who, Durgaji comes in or Hanumanji comes into the body, and then the voice changes, the face changes, and everything.
It is handy if the body into which the deity or spirit enters is well prepared for it through long sadhanas, but it is certainly not essential. In Vrindavan, the Ras Leela, the story of Krishna's dalliance with the milkmaids, is performed by many troops of players. Krishna is played by the most beautiful 10 or 12-year-old boy who can be found. Daily, he self identifies with Krishna. If you were to worship him ritually as if he were Krishna, before long he would start to get Krishna within his body, and then you would be worshipping Krishna directly.
So in Vrindavan, there are many mandalis who actually perform these, I don't know what it is called. Shimangla, what it is called?
Leela, Leela,
Yeah, the
it's Leela,
Leelas.
Leela.
They perform the Krishna Leela and all that. And the person who becomes Lord Krishna is actually worshipped as Lord Krishna. They, even when he's not in the acting form, people come and touch his feet and all that stuff goes on. Okay. So they're actually embodying the spirit of Krishna into that actor. And that actor constantly acts as Krishna.
Unfortunately, no one ever thinks of doing this. They are all too busy worshipping stones. And besides, these troops have to play for big merchants in order to survive. While the play is going on, the merchant worships the boy as if he were Krishna. After the performance is over, he goes to the manager of the troupe and says, "Take this money and give me the boy who played Krishna. I want to fire his ass." How can such a thought enter anyone's mind? You don't even need a human for Avishkar. On the day when Ganesha is to be worshipped, I go to the zoo and feed the elephants with my own hand. I give them the things they like, especially sugarcane. By reciting a certain mantra, I cause Ganesha to enter the body of the elephant, and by worshipping the elephant, I worship Ganesh. Isn't this better than worshipping a rock? Not only will Ganesh be pleased, the elephant will appreciate being fed and will bless me himself in his own way. I am doubly fortunate. Roshni learned to do this from me. She even climbs the fence to get inside the elephant pens to feed them if necessary. If you want to do Avishkar yourself, you have to create a spiritual vacuum within. Otherwise, how will the other personality be able to come in and take control? You must get lost in order to get the result, because the spirit or the deity can enter you only if you are empty. The superpowers are busy creating political vacuums that they can fill. You must do the same thing on the spiritual level.
So unless there is space, the spirit cannot enter. So that's why the stilling of the mind, becoming empty, becoming one, is very, very important for you to be able to make that ultimate connection.
Next, you must self identify with the spirit or deity who is being called. In the beginning, when you do Avishkar, you must put on all the outer garments and accessories characteristic of the desired personality. If your imagination is not strong, these props are necessary. For instance, when someone I know wants to do Avishkar of Kalaji Rathod, one of the Rajput generals, he dresses just like a Hindu prince of 400 years ago and carries a cavalry saber. He wears a Rajput style turban and offers everyone present opium diluted in water, the warrior's favorite drink.
So again, in shamanism also, when you want to call in a helping spirit, there is a ritual or there is a process by which you actually dress up like the spirit that you're calling. And the idea is that you have to put your energy into making the dress also. So you need to make the dress literally yourself. You can give directions to a tailor or someone to make the dress, but basically what is happening is you're going into altered states of consciousness, meeting the spirits, seeing what they are wearing and how they behave, etc., making the dresses, getting the accessories which that helping spirit uses, and then wearing that, and then doing the ritual with that helping spirit. So this is exactly what is done in shamanism also.
This is the lowest form of Avishkar. The intermediate stage is when you can self identify mentally, directly, with no thought for the physical details. If you are really sensitive, the right music should be sufficient to induce Avishkar. The ultimate is to be so attuned that the spirit or deity comes at the merest thought.
So now, what are we doing? Shivamla, you have to reduce your volume, your mic volume. What we are doing in the Monroe process is that we are going into an altered state and then creating encodings in that altered state to be able to access those states of consciousness. Okay. So over here, he's same thing he's saying. The intermediary state is when you can self-identify mentally directly with no thought for the physical details. If you are really sensitive, the right music will also be sufficient to induce avishkar. Okay, so what are we doing? We are going into an altered state using music in the Monroe process. So we are coming into the intermediate release state. Now, when we go into a higher state, just the thought of that space will take you into that space or will connect you with that particular spirit. So again, we've got encodings created in the Monroe process, which will immediately take you to the person that you're wanting to talk to. So this is exactly what we are doing in the Monroe process also, but we do not need to do so many sadhanas to be able to get there because we are using technology to put us into that altered state of consciousness.
At first, you have no control over who comes or when. They come and go as they please. As you get better at it, you request certain ones to enter you at certain times. When you are really expert, the ethereal beings themselves will beg you to permit them to enter. because they love to play about. That's the beauty of it. Finally, you enter the state in which there is no need of even the formality of Avishkar. The spirits and deities are always with you, coming in and going out as required.
So this is exactly what happens in shamanism also. You make a relationship with your helping spirits. You make that connection. And whenever you think of them, they are right there with you. And it's absolutely works like that. Okay, when that connection is made.
During the Avishkar, the subject has no idea of his earthly existence. Afterward, his body feels terrible because Avishkar is a tremendous strain on the nerves, but he doesn't care. If he does Avishkar of a deity, he is in a state of total bliss. No iota of ego separates him from his beloved deity. After the Avishkar is over, he feels blank, empty for several hours until the old personality becomes firmly fixed in the body again. Ramakrishna Paramhans loved to go into Mahabhav Samadhi, emotional highlights, and play about with the Divine Mother, Bhavatarini. But at the end of his life, his disciples actually prevented him from doing so as much as they could to save his body. He never cared for his body, though.
So again, when we are going into these altered states, the connection with the physical body starts to diminish. Okay. The more deeper you go into that state of consciousness, the less connection is there with the physical body. So basically, if you're not used to it, it will create a tremendous strain in your system. Having said that, with the Monroe process, it becomes very easy to go into these altered states and come back, because in the Monroe process, it's all done very stepwise, and very, very systematically done. Because of that, you really do not feel the strain of doing this kind of thing. Someone is annotizing. Please don't annotize.
You can't afford to care for your body if you really want to do a good Avishkar. When the Avishkar is going on, the subject's body can do and endure things it would never be able to do otherwise. There is a certain fellow many of my children know. We call him Das Bappa. When he does Avishkar of Mahakali, he slashes his arms, neck, and tongue, and blood pours from the wounds. But he doesn't feel a thing until afterward. Even then, there is no problem because the wounds close automatically and heal quickly. When Anjaneya enters him, he can drink a bucket full of mustard oil with a pound of oxide of mercury stirred into it, and nothing will happen to him. That is the power of Anjaneya.
Okay, so in the Christians also, they have this stigmata where people suddenly get the wounds of where Christ was put up on the cross, right? They get the blood on the head, the hands में खून आ जाता है, and even in the legs, right? So the stigmata is what? You're getting that spirit of that person into you, and whatever was happening to that person will start to happen. So over here also, if she was calling Kali ji, you're cutting the thing, but the wounds heal very, very fast. There are many people, they'll put a rod through their the thing over here and take it out from here, but there's no blood. So when you're in an altered state, all these things can happen. You're over here specifically, you're calling that spirit into you and then doing things. But if you're in an altered state, all these things you can perform tasks which in normal state of consciousness you would not have been able to perform.
Once some town people tried to test Das Bappa. They told him they were going to build a bonfire into which he would have to jump. If Anjaneya really entered the body, he would remain unburned, and only then would everyone believe his claims. The fire was built, and as soon as Anjaneya entered him, Das Bappa jumped directly into the flames and stayed in there about an hour. And who got burned? The people who forced him to jump in and stood there to watch. They got their demonstration, all right. When this Das Bappa does Avishkar of a certain spirit named Bhima Bappa, his body is tied into a shroud, just like a corpse. When the Avishkar begins, the body jumps into the air, despite the fact that the arms and legs are tied. This particular spirit likes cigarettes and smokes 15 at a time, in a big bunch. Once a fellow watching this demonstration tried to be funny and challenged Bhim Bappa to do some of the work immediately. The spirit said, "Okay, if you think I can't do anything, try to get up from where you are sitting." He couldn't.
So many times what happens is that, you attempt to test these people. And at times this, when you're testing them, it can come back at you very badly. So, there's a very thin line over here of where what you should believe and what you shouldn't. But again, it also all depends on your conscious awareness. How aware are you and what are you with? Because these things do happen, let me tell you. And uh, testing them can become a very dangerous thing.
3 or 4 people were unable to lift him. After some time, the spirit told this fellow, "Well, now we are all going to leave. If you are interested, why don't you come along with us?" Tears came up into the man's eyes, and he was finally allowed to get up. But this was a good sign that Bhim Bappa was able to do work. You must always test these things thoroughly.
Hello.
If you must test these things thoroughly. If you are requesting a deity to come, you must make sure that it is really a deity and which has come and not a tiny spirit of a lower order who may masquerade as a deity and fool you.
So again, that's why it becomes very important to be consciously aware of what you're dealing with. What is the state of consciousness you are operating at? What is the state of consciousness that the helping spirit that is coming into the system is operating at? And this can only come after experiencing. That's why in shamanism they say that when you are going into these other worlds, you have to ask them, are you my teacher? Are you my helper? And then see the answers you get. Many times they will come to the middle world to talk to you, right? Then you have to tell them that show me your home. So which level of the upper world or the lower world they reside in determines what is the state of consciousness they are operating at. So that's why it becomes very important to even test them. But testing them with conscious awareness becomes very important. So it is a distinction between tark and kutark, whether you're doing kutark with them or you're doing tark with them. If you're doing tark, then there's no problem because that you're doing for understanding. But if you're doing kutark to, put them down, then it becomes a huge problem.
Take the example of Das Bappa again. When he wanted to do Avishkar of Gorakhnath, he had to dress up like a Nath. Black handkerchief, ash on the forehead, string wound around the waist, jingle bells on his feet, and a fire tongs with bells on it. He smoked quite a lot of ganja and then started to shout, "Ow, ow, owlek, owlek," just as a Nath would, waving the fire tongs over his head and bashing himself with it over his shoulders, neck, and head. All this was necessary for him to self identify with Gorakhnath sufficiently to permit Gorakh to enter him.
So the more you dress up, the more you start behaving like the spirit that you're inviting, the more your vibratory frequency starts to match that spirit. So then that spirit can enter your system.
During the Avishkar, he had to cross a water channel in the floor of the cave in which we were seated. Some people got up to help him over it, thinking that he might trip, but I told them to sit down. If Gorak was there, he would never lose his footing. He is a Nath after all. But if there was only a spirit, there he would have a nice fall. In this case, Gorak was there, but only a few minutes. Then a little spirit came and started playing about. I knew about it because I knew the signs. For instance, he gave his fire tongs to someone else to shake while he was talking. Would Gorak ever give his fire tongs to a human being? Never. Then he was talking about himself, Das Bapa. Would Goraknath ever bother about anyone as mediocre as that? And there were some subtle changes in the eyes also. Besides, he was answering so many questions wrong. Gorak could never be wrong.
So again, you have to look for the signs. And again, eyes are the doorway, right? So you have to observe the eyes.
Someone is annotating. I love to do Avishkar because I get an opportunity to play with my beloved deities, Anjaneya, Ma, Goraknath. But I never bother about the external formalities. I don't believe in using crutches when you can walk on your own 2 feet. Still, if there is music, I appreciate it, and incense is essential since deities eat through the sense of smell. The music can be anything appropriate. For Anjaneya, I prefer devotional chantings. But for Ma, there is a song from a certain Hindi film which always sends me into an avishkar unless I am careful. It is dangerous to go into avishkar when you're driving down the road at top speed listening to the radio.
So again, these are triggers, right? So the music, that one song will trigger him to go into an avishkar and connect with the divine mother. Okay. Another one, because of the sense of smell, he will be transported. So again, triggers. You can create triggers for yourself to be able to go into these states of consciousness. So these are like encodings that we use in the Monroe process also.
Unfortunately, I can't do avishkar of deities too frequently because it is too great a strain on the nerves and it makes me want to leave this miserable existence and get on to greater things. Do you think this is the only place I have to play in? But I want to finish up certain projects before I die, so I have to restrict my avishkar. Instead, I often do avishkar of sadhus or fakirs long since dead. It's interesting.
So again, when we are going into these altered states and we are not ready for it, then at times it can create an issue for us. Okay. And over here he says that he does Avishkar of sadhus and fakirs who have been dead. So he's inviting the spirits of those people, those jnanis, to come into him. So they're not deities. They're at a lower level who have been in earth already. So they're much closer to this physical reality than they're going into the etheric reality.
Suppose I want to do avishkar of the Mughal Emperor Akbar. Now, Akbar must already have taken birth in so many wombs and probably is embodied even now. What will happen is that when I call for the spirit of Akbar, the body in which he now resides will lose consciousness. Without a personality to self identify with, how can it express itself? As long as the Avishkar goes on, the body will be inert, and as soon as Akbar leaves me, he will return to the other body, which will awake without any knowledge of what has happened.
Okay,
Akbar,
so there is a slight distinction over here in from the Monroe policy. What we are looking at is that we can be in multiple states of consciousness simultaneously, right? So over here he says that the spirit will leave that other person and come. I think the two realities can exist simultaneously. This is what we are seeing, and even in fringe we are seeing that there are two separate realities and both are existing. Of course, they can't merge and intermingle, but both can exist simultaneously in different spaces.
Akbar, in his present condition, may not know he was once Akbar. That's not necessary. But all the old records are still stored in the causal body, and that's what I'm interested in. So I don't bother about Akbar's present personality. It has its own job to do.
So every one of us has a unique ID code. Okay. When we think of that person we identify with that code, and that person comes in.
I'm very fond of Kinaram Aghori. He's so sweet and gentle, the ideal Aghori. But for mundane benefits, Muslim spirits are always better. Muslims live for emotion and they are always more playful after death. Hindus, on the contrary, become steadier, and if they want to make you rich, they will take their time about it, so you will be able to digest your new riches before going overboard. But if a Muslim decides to make you rich, he says, at least once I'll make you exuberant like I am, no matter what the consequences may be. I don't have to request them for their exuberance, it is natural to them. I often do Avishkar of Nizamuddin Aula from Delhi and also of Abdul Qadir Gilani, one of the most famous saints of Iraq. But I guess my favorite is Akbar. There must be some Rin Anubandhan there somewhere.
So whichever culture you are born in, part of it will always rub off. Okay. Because that data is always stored in the causal body.
When I do Avishkar of Akbar, I always wear a turban. I tie it myself. None of these modern pre tied turbans for me. Thank you. I don't require the turban for my concentration, to be sure, but Akbar was Emperor of India, and if I want to play about with him, I have to respect him in that way. So I am actually offering him what one offers an emperor. Those who come to witness the Avishkar must also behave as if they are actually in the presence of Shahenshah Muhammad Jalaluddin Akbar. Janapana Alampara Kudavan Mere Dil e Subhani Mahabali. Pretend you had come to visit me and we decided to have an Avishkar. Once Akbar came, you would first know it by my eyes. They change color slightly and become fixed, staring directly ahead into yours. As long as Akbar is within my body, they will never blink. Also, my foot will begin to shake as long as Akbar is there. Then you must play your part. Imagine yourself as a courtier in the hall of audience of His Majesty. How would you act? Reverently. You have to, because insolence in front of a king is equivalent to inviting death to approach you. Remember, my body is still present, but I, Vimlanand, am not. I have gone elsewhere to play about in another way. Your work is with Akbar, so you forget my body and concentrate on him. First, bend low to salute him. If he is pleased, he will offer you his hand. Kiss it. Then, to please him all the more, apply attar to his hand. Hina attar is the best. All Muslims love Hina. When you speak to him, use Urdu if at all possible. It was his court language. I also love to speak in Urdu, but you'll notice that when Akbar is within me, my vocabulary and style of speech change drastically. He was an emperor, after all, and emperors are always fond of flowery speech. They are also fond of flattery, if it is not too ubiquitous. So, when Akbar asks you to admire his turban, describe its beauty to him in glowing terms. Offer him a cigarette if you like. Hookahs were in vogue at that time, but he has no choice if he wants to play about in today's world, does he? Hookahs are outdated according to the so called modern people. Akbar loved wine, so you can offer him drinks also. His wine was much different than is ours, much sweeter and tastier. But if you offer it with respect, he'll accept it. Offer him music. Don't make the mistake of expecting him to appreciate modern music. It is just so much noise to him. Offer him classical Hindustani music, especially Rag Darbari or Rag Miya Ke Malhar. These two rags were specially composed just for Akbar by his court musician, the famous Tansen. If you can't sing or play an instrument yourself, a recording will do just as well. Once he is feeling intoxicated from the attar, the tobacco, the alcohol, and the music, he will begin to talk about any subject which seems fit to him. Keep quiet and listen to him, speaking when he expects you to. Don't be argumentative. It will just sour his mood, and he won't be willing to do any work for you. Roshni used to wrangle with him, and for so long he would never come when she was around. Can an emperor permit any insubordination? Never. He may speak about anything, he may even tell jokes. Here's a sample. Do you know the main difference between the days of the Mughals and these days? Back then, before you started on a journey, you would take your horse or elephant aside and permit it to remove the liquid element from its bladder. Today, before you start, you must take your mount, motor vehicle, and put the liquid element into its bladder. Whether you think his jokes are funny or not, though they are usually, you must laugh a little to be polite. When he is finally satisfied and feeling expansive, he will ask you what you want. Don't hesitate. He is an emperor, and emperors know only how to give. They are famous for giving because it builds up their reputation. Does anyone dare to give a better present than the emperor? So be bold. Tell him what you want, preferably material from life. You can ask him about the spiritual also, because he became very spiritual in his later days. But he is better with the mundane because he was Shehenshah, the king of kings, and Janapana, the refuge of the world. There is no use for me to speak. Dozens of people have attended Akbar's Avishkars and they have had their work done. Any sort of work, passing exams, getting new jobs, removing thorns in the office, finding a runaway child, curing diseases, anything. He will ask each person present in the room what he or she desires and will spend time with each, discussing it before he moves on to the next, just as if he was still seated on his throne, dispensing favors. That is why he is valuable, because he was installed on the throne. It is the throne which gives him his authority. Takht ki tasir is the Hindi phrase. The authority or power lies in the throne itself. Even his son Salim, who got away with murder otherwise, had to tremble once in his august presence. So, as long as you play along with the situation, your work will be done along with everyone else's.
So whenever these energies come, you have to adhere to them, right? You have to be very conscious of what they are wanting and what they want to do if you want to have their blessings.
Finally, when everyone has been attended to and all problems have been dealt with, he will ask again 2 or 3 times, is there anyone left to ask anything? When no one replies, then he'll say, now I'm going to return to Sikandra, which is where he was buried. And he may say something like, "When I was alive, I had authority over the whole of India, but now I am reduced to an ethereal form. All my worldly authority has disappeared." That is the way it always is with the world. Seek that which is beyond the world. Then you should salute him in the Mughal way, head bent low from the neck, palm raised to the lips. He will then return to his own place. Each personality has his or her own peculiarity, of course. You don't treat Ganesh the same way you would treat Akbar. You have to be clever enough to know how to satisfy each personality and what sort of work to take from each. Asking about money to Shmashan Tara is useless, but she might be willing to cure disease. It takes experience to know all about it. But some of my children have sufficient experience and get all their work done this way. I'm very happy since it's that much less for me to do. Someone once asked me, "Why should these people who lived so long ago bother to come back and play with you? What do they get out of it?" I can't tell you what they get out of it, but they must get something, otherwise, they wouldn't do it. Here in the world, no one does anything without some self interest, not even spirits. But then that's between them and me.
So every energy has its own propensity and its own capacity. You have to know what to ask of which spirit. Okay. That's why in the workshops also, asking the correct question, asking in the correct way is extremely important.
The best kind of Avishkar is the one in which no one has any idea of what is going on. Once I decided to teach a lesson to a friend of mine who refused to believe in such things. I never told him what I intended to do. I just suggested that there was no limit to the power of the human mind. When he challenged me to prove the truth of my statement, I told him I would perform a keratoplasty operation with my own hands. He was an eye surgeon and he knew I had never been trained in surgery, though I had qualified in Ayurveda. He thought I was gas bagging, so I outlined the operation in detail. He was taken aback, but to test me, he took a tray of instruments and asked me to pick out the trephine I would use. When I immediately selected the right instrument, he was impressed, and he agreed to permit me to perform the operation. A suitable patient was located, and I operated a few days later. It was all over in a matter of minutes, and the patient recovered much sooner than expected. My poor friend could never understand how it might be possible. It was not me, of course, doing the operation, it was an expert surgeon. I had been able to locate one, and he was willing to perform the surgery using my body in return for a certain favor, which I was happy to do for him. A fair exchange is no robbery. Maybe the ultimate in this sort of thing is to cause Avishkar in someone else, without either that individual or those surrounding having any suspicion that something is unusual. I recall a very sad case which fortunately turned out happily. There was an Australian lady who had come to India with her small son in hopes of procuring enlightenment from one of the local holy men in Pune. She and the boy, who must have been 5 or 6, had been reduced to living in a small hut in a smashan of all places because she had donated all her money to her guru and there had been nothing left to live on. A smashan is a fine place for an Aghori, his home in fact, but it is no place for the unwary like this tiny western tot. He developed typhoid, and after it seemed he might recover, suddenly he turned up with all the signs and symptoms of acute peritonitis. One of the typhoid ulcers in his intestine must have perforated. The mother went to her guru for help, but she might as well have approached a stone for all the good it did her. One of the disciples told her, "We can't help it if your child is sick. All humans have to die sometime. Be prepared." A fine attitude from a guru. None of her fellow foreigners were inclined to help her. The only person who was in the least interested in her plight was Dr. Ladd, the chief medical officer in the hospital into which her son was admitted. He provided him free medicines and donated a pint of his own blood for the operation. But the surgeon who was to operate was convinced of the likelihood of failure and was leaning in favor of cancelling the operation. Dr. Ladd, who has known me for some time, came to me and explained the entire situation. I sat and smoked over it for a short while when suddenly I heard the tinkling of bells outside. An elephant. The sight of an elephant is always auspicious, or so we Indians believe. I rushed outside and fed it some apples, the only fruit we had handy. Well, I said to myself, this is a good sign. It seems that what I have planned will succeed. And I turned to Dr. Ladd and told him, "Go and tell your surgeon to operate without any fear. The child will pull through." I
So
had to return to
again,
Bombay that day.
the signs, the universe always gives signs. And any shaman, any agori will always look for the signs that the universe is providing.
I had to return to Bombay that day, so it was only the next day that I learned over the telephone the outcome of the operation. First, it had been almost bloodless. There had been no need of administering any blood. Second, well, let the surgeon speak for himself. Until now, my hands always used to shake when I would operate, he told Dr. Ladd after emerging from the operating theatre. But I don't know what happened this time. It seemed to me as if something had taken over my hands, that they had a life of their own, and they moved so quickly and accurately that I was myself surprised.
So there have been many cases like the sleeping prophet, Edgar Casey. He used to regularly, other doctors used to come into him and then he used to give medical prescriptions. And there have been many cases where, doctors have come into the energy field of a person and then operated. Many doctors, they don't even realize it when they are in the operation theater and they actually go into an altered state of consciousness and perform the operations. They don't know it. And I would say that most good doctors actually go into these states when they are in that process because they're totally focused in the operation. So they will shift states of consciousness.
Not only that, he continued, but as soon as I opened the abdomen, the intestine leapt out at me, and it was child's play to repair it. I have never operated like this before. I just can't understand it, but I think God must have been helping me.
So we have also seen that there is a surgery support series in the Monroe tracks, and we have seen one thing that when people are going into an operation, if they use the tracks and go, the blood loss is reduced. The person recovers much quicker. The pain medication required is also lower.
He can never know what was helping him, but why should he bother about it? The little boy made an uneventful recovery, and after he was strong enough, his mother's sister sent them plane tickets from Australia, and they returned there. I am sorry to say, however, that after leaving her son in the care of her sister, the lady came right back to India and resumed her place at the feet of a guru. I don't care for her at all. If she is so heartless and cruel as to expose her son to such dangers in the first place, then desert him and run back to her playmates, She is no mother, but I am glad the little boy could be saved. Mahakal always likes to avoid taking children, and I was happy to see the honor of India preserved. Supposing he had died here, forever afterward, the mother, her relatives, and their friends would have cursed India for killing him, forgetting their own complicity in it. So everyone's work was done, and no one was stained by karma. Should we stop here?
Yeah, okay, we can stop it.